What excites you about marketing?
I think what excites me about marketing is that, to me, marketing is about connecting with an audience and connecting a film to an audience. And from my perspective, and because I mostly work with filmmakers, and so it's the crucial thing to, when you've made a film, to getting people to see it. And it's also within marketing and distribution, which are usually linked together for obvious reasons. And people complain about distribution. It's actually, to me, distribution is relatively easy and has been for some time now. It's marketing that's hard. What the hardest thing is that we're in an age of abundance. There's all kinds of content plus other things for people to engage with. And you as a filmmaker or as an artist or any person, entrepreneur, you have to break through that noise that people are surrounded by every day. And the key thing about that, I mean, I have a system that I talk about this, but you're not just trying to break through the noise, but you're trying to break through the noise to the audience for your particular film, for instance, or music or art. And while you might think that the audience is everyone, it generally isn't and never is. And so it's important to understand, and part of marketing is understanding who your audience is, and then how do you connect with them, and then also understanding what value you provide to them. It's not, you have to kind of think positively in terms of like, what are you providing for people so that people will engage with you and engage with your content, essentially want to see your film. So
When we last spoke to you in 2013, 2014, you mentioned that you tend to have a Pollyanna-ish outlook on things. Is that the same now?
Well, that's so funny. Did I actually say that? I would say yeah, because I think my fundamental belief is that every film has a path. And even as the system is broken now, the system ultimately, and I'm in these distribution think tank discussions, and people talk about it being broken, but what we have to always remind ourselves is that it's been broken for at least 15 years, at least since 2007 and potentially before, and so people have been, and I think what people, even though the situation is a little tougher now, what we are standing on the shoulders of people who have been experimenting with things for 15 years or even 20 years. And so there are a lot of tools and techniques that have been tried, and some have failed, but many have succeeded, that filmmakers, since we're mainly talking about film here, can take advantage of. And so that's why I would say I still have a positive outlook. Maybe not Pollyanna, not as far as Pollyanna-ish, yes, would be maybe a little thing too far, but I generally have a positive outlook. But that's not saying that things are tough, and that it's tougher to monetize these days if that's your goal. It's just everything. There's so much more content, so it's tougher to get eyeballs. Everything's tougher. But it doesn't mean that there isn't, great success possible.
Right, it's interesting that you say things are tough because, when we first met you, there was this whole thing of the gatekeepers are gone and the democratization of film was going to change everything. So actually then there's a fallacy that was this big floodgate opening and that these artists no longer needed the suits.
I think that, yes, and I think that, I think there still are gatekeepers, and there probably were gatekeepers then, but there were tools developing where you didn't have to depend on those gatekeepers. And that's what I'm saying, those tools are even more fleshed out now. And so that's why, in a sense, as I said, distribution is easy, in a sense, relatively easy. There's many ways to get your film out into the world or your content out into the world. The tough part is getting people to want to see it. But people are really doubling down now on things that probably should have been developed over the last 10 and 15 years that weren't developed, but now that the crisis is, in a sense, bigger, and there's a feeling of it being more broken, that there's more people who are very smart and imaginative, creating newer and more interesting solutions that will be even more helpful to filmmakers. And I think now what's interesting is it feels less on the distribution side and more on the marketing side and to me, that's where the innovations need to come from, because that's the toughest nut to crack. There is one thing I'll say that is a little tougher with distribution, is that during the pandemic, unfortunately, a lot of independent art houses closed. And so it's made booking theatrical tougher, because there's fewer theaters, there's less quote unquote real estate out there for filmmakers to book. Hence, the theaters that do exist, their shelves are full, or their screens are full. They're less willing to, although we work with a lot of theaters that will, take our films, and but it's tougher out there just because there's fewer screens. And which is a shame, because there's still, I believe, a lot that can be, and not every film should have a theatrical release, but there are films that could benefit from a theatrical release that probably either don't have the resources, or even if they have the resources, it's a tough landscape to book in. So that's one thing I feel in the distribution side that's become a little tougher, or significantly tougher since the pandemic.
Going back to Bomb It, your documentary on contemporary graffiti, was this the first time you realized you were good at marketing?
Well, probably marketing. No, because when myself and the two producers of Better Living Through Circuitry, we were very involved in the release of that film, even though that was with a traditional distributor. And so we were pretty involved in the marketing of that. But yeah, probably Bomb It is where I really kind of expanded my understanding of marketing. Yeah, probably. Distribution, I think, goes all the way back to my punk rock days. But marketing, yeah, I would say Bomb It. And that's natural, because, street art is a lot about marketing, in a sense, and some graffiti writers would say, they're just getting their names up. It's all marketing. Like, that's what they're doing. They're marketing their name. So it probably is a natural that film is where I probably, learned more, and also probably studied it and took it more seriously, and then kind of looked at, in retrospect, like what I did that worked, what didn't work. And that's when I started writing the book and talking to a lot of people in the industry in terms of what worked, what works, what doesn't work, so I could convey that to other filmmakers.
What was your marketing plan with Bomb It 1?
Oh my God, that's like, you're taking me back to literally 2008, 2009. Literally, it's 15 years ago. So I know that, so I wanted Shepard Fairey to do the poster, because he's great. But I also knew that it would be an iconic image that would help spread the brand of Bomb It around. So, not to take anything away from Shepard's artwork and why I wanted to work with him, but also I just knew that he's a brilliant creator of iconic imagery that just is almost like, as you say, and he works with brands, like, just, you go, oh wow, that's Bomb It, that's the image, in a sense. So that was part of it. And to me, part of marketing is the materials, obviously. So the trailer, the key art, the extra content. So it's all actually starting to come back to me. So the key art was important. Not only the trailer, we did a couple of trailers, but not only did we do a couple trailers, we also created a lot of extra short content. So we created like probably 20, and I actually just revisited these because Bomb It, actually, we have excerpts of Bomb It playing in a museum in Copenhagen for literally, I think the exhibit's going to be 2 or 3 years. So I just created a video piece of excerpts, and I was originally going to use the short pieces that I made. So we made like 20 short pieces and put those online, which I actually have to reissue because we yanked them off online. We actually did a web series with, and those were purposed for an online company called Babblegum, which actually paid us to do that, but then they are also promoting those short content pieces. So, and then I developed a pretty good email list. So we did email list marketing. That was kind of in the heyday of affiliate marketing. So I had a lot of affiliate marketing partners and that was more possible in a sense back then. Now it's a little harder for film, although I think there's some new techniques that are developing in distribution that I think might bring affiliate marketing back, which is kind of exciting. And I'm actually reminding myself, because I'm on a couple campaigns this summer where we might be doing these things that Kinema has labeled film drops. And I don't know whether it's kind of doing, and another company that I'm talking to this week is calling it LVOD, which is live video on demand, and it's not really quite that. It's not really TVOD, it's not really PVOD, it's not really LVOD, and so film drops is the name. I think Christie's very smart from Kinema, and that's what she called it, kind of similar to a music drop. And and I think that might bring back affiliate marketing a bit, which I think will be interesting to see how that works out. And I think there's a couple of campaigns I'm working on this summer that we might try that out on. So anyway, so we did affiliate marketing. We hired a publicist who did a great job. Let's see, we had influencers. Even before influencers were a thing, like we had a fair amount of influencers from the street art world, and then we had some partner organizations, but they're in the street art graffiti world. There aren't really partner organizations, or weren't then, that you could count on. But we worked with brands, we worked with different companies, and we got some sponsorship. And so I think that's. For 14 years later, or 15 years later, that's a pretty good remembrance of what we did.
Great. One last thing though, the t-shirts.
Oh yeah.
You said maybe you were a little bit amiss with the t-shirts.
No, well so the t-shirts, yes. Did I say that back then too? Probably.
Well, you said it was more marketed to maybe a woman, that would shop at Fred Siegel.
Yeah. I'm so funny I said that. But that's actually, to me, t-shirts are kind of a product. So it's not, in a sense, they are marketing, but we didn't create the t-shirts for marketing. We actually created stickers for marketing. So that's another thing we did, is we did a sticker campaign. And we also did street teams. Now that I remember it, we had a pretty big street team campaign going on, which is appropriate for some films, but not all films. And I think it was appropriate for Vomit because it's, a subculture. And I think if you have a film about a subculture, street teaming can work. But I think part of it is, actually that's something I should revisit again, is street teaming. I think some projects, but it can be a little costly. And when you're on lower budgets, which most people are on these days, if you have choices in what you're going to spend your money on, street teaming would be, I think, only for certain films, because there's other things that you would do with those resources. But getting back to the t-shirts can function as marketing, but we didn't do it as marketing. And in most cases, I wouldn't really recommend t-shirts as marketing. I would recommend them more as merchandise, as a product to sell. And that's if you have an audience that you think is going to buy t-shirts to self-identify with the film, which we did with Vomit, and I just made a mistake on my choosing the right product for my audience. So that was a lesson in that, and that's where, because we create, as you said, what I said back then was we chose t-shirt material that was for the wrong audience, and that we should have chosen the thicker t-shirt material, which was for our core audience. And then it was also, I did make a decision at one time, like, do I want to be making and selling t-shirts, or do I want to make films? And because getting deep into merchandise is a whole nother thing. And if you have a team and, for your film, like I'm consulting on a film about pro beach hockey, and merch is a huge thing for them. And a couple of other films that merch will be a huge thing for those particular films. But it's not necessarily, something that's for every film. The thing about merchandise is, do you have an audience that is like a collector type audience, or an audience that you feel will want to have something to remember the film by, and is T-shirts that object in a sense? And I know, well, we did the film that I worked on about Nazreen Sotoudeh, who's an Iranian human rights activist, and they produced T-shirts, for free, and that was part of marketing. But part of the goal of that film was to keep Nazreen alive in the Iranian prison system, and by having people from all over the world wearing free Nazreen shirts, that helps. It helps, convey a message. So, anyway.
What did you learn about yourself after the release of Bomb It?
Well, I guess the key thing I learned about myself was, that I enjoyed this other part of filmmaking, which is distribution and marketing, and that I had a knack for it, and that I had a knack for creating a system of how to make that work and convey that to other filmmakers. Because I never, even though I had dabbled in distribution and marketing prior to that, I never kind of got so immersed in it and realized that, I actually do enjoy this process of connecting a film to an audience. And I actually have a skill set in that. And I also have a way of seeing it systematically, so that, and in a way that I can help other filmmakers with what they're struggling with. And so that's probably the thing I think that I would say I fundamentally learned the most, and has kind of been a large part of my life since then. And, sometimes completely taking over my life, I would say.
Did you learn about any Achilles heels you had regarding what you thought maybe your strengths were?
That's so funny, because when I interview interns and assistants, I always have a question: what are your strengths? And what are your weaknesses? Or what are your strengths, and what do you feel you need to work on more? And so it's funny that you're giving me the strength weakness question.
Okay, we didn't know that. That was just
no. It's funny because it's, yeah. Well, I think the weakness, the thing that comes immediately to mind is work balance, in a sense, and or work-life balance, or in this particular case, helping other filmmakers versus staying and being a creative person. So that's the tension that I'm often dealing with. And because I enjoy working with other filmmakers, it's also part of how I earn my living, in a sense. But I also want to retain and stay being a creative person. So over the years since Bomb It, I made Bomb It 2. And then I also have been a consulting producer or co-producer on a number of other projects, and then even a full producer on a couple of other films. And then for the last 5 years, I've been developing a feature documentary about Mark Pauline and his group Survival Research Laboratories that he started. These are the robotic performance artists that I worked with back in the 80s. And so it's now almost 5 years ago I've started shooting that documentary. And so that's ongoing. And then I've also been developing a doc series. And then also, as you know, about a year ago, I started doing a podcast about people's psychedelic experiences. And one of the reasons I did that is because, documentaries take so long and are so dependent on fundraising, or can be dependent on fundraising and dependent on other people and circumstances. And like the doc series we've been developing, we optioned the book 2 years ago, and now it's coming to, we're about to, finish a deck for it and go out and pitch it. And, those processes are long, whereas podcasts are, as you know, and this might be up in 2 weeks, can be a much faster, facile way of communicating and being creative. So that's a long answer to your question, but I would say, yeah, that's the thing that I probably is the one of the big, in the related struggle is just wanting to do too much. And so it's so funny. I have a tarot reader that I do at the beginning of every year, and she uses tarot but other cards, and she I'm trying to remember the first card she pulled. So the first card she pulls at the beginning of this year is stress management. And it's so funny. At the time I was going, no, I think I'm managing, work balance and work-life balance. And when I say work balance, I mean, working with other filmmakers and my own work. And then work-life balance is then having a life outside of both of those aspects of work. And, it's just, I have, the amount of things I'm trying to do now just sometimes feels, I sometimes think I must be insane with everything I try to do. But, it's like you're here, you have one life. So, why not make the most of it?
Why do you say that every movie deserves a unique distribution and marketing path?
Because I fundamentally believe that every film is different, every filmmaking team is different, and those are the two main aspects that then affect that every film has a different audience. Every film has different ways to connect with audiences. Very importantly, every filmmaking team will have different goals. They'll have different sets of resources. So when you factor all of those things combined, which are, I've laid out into very simple categories, but there's a deep dive into each one of those. But when you factor each of those aspects, you always end up with a different plan. And I've never seen any film replicating another film's plan. And I've worked with hundreds of filmmakers over the last 10 years. And there's never, ever plans that are carbon copies of each other, or even close approximations of each other. There's always differences, always. So, and that's why, and that's a benefit in a sense, because if every film was the same and everyone had the same goals and the same audiences, all those audiences would, be it just wouldn't work. The system couldn't function. So and to me, that's the challenge for filmmakers is to understand that that's the path they need to find. And that's what I enjoy helping filmmakers find, is that path.
Why does every filmmaker think that they're a unicorn within the film world?
I don't think every filmmaker thinks that anymore. I think they did at one time, but I don't think, and I think there's still a decent percentage of that going on. I think there's a few reasons for it. I think you have to be eternally optimistic to be a filmmaker, because you couldn't, being a filmmaker and everything you have to do in order to complete a film is so difficult that if you weren't optimistic, you would stop. And I think, so maybe there's lots of filmmakers out there that aren't optimistic and they don't finish, because if you're not optimistic, it's too tough of a road to finish. So I think innately, it's one of the key qualities of being a filmmaker, either a director or producer, or someone on the team has to be optimistic. Ultimately, probably all of them do on some level. And So when you have that optimism, you're thinking positively about what's going to happen with your film. And so I think that's part of it. I think, and this is the topic of what I'm writing about in my newsletter next week, is I think there's, within the film ecosystem, even though this knowledge has been around for at least 15 years, if not longer, that not every film can be satisfied by a traditional acquisitions model. In fact, these days it's maybe a couple percent, maybe, if we're lucky. Like, say in a good year, it's 10%. You still have 90% of people who aren't satisfied by an acquisitions model. And these days, with the system as broken as it is, it's probably 1 or 2%. And even if that, to be honest. But the ecosystem, and you see it now that financiers are seeing, oh my God, these films aren't selling, they're not investing in films. So it makes investment harder. And so there's a incentive within the film industry to think that everyone's a unicorn, in a sense, that everyone's going to sell, that financially all films will be fine, or any film that you invest in, there's going to be a wonderful distribution path for that film. Because if there wasn't, then people wouldn't invest. If you're in an equity finance dependent model, which I don't think we should be completely in. But, and that's part of the reason the industry is hurting now, and why when you read things of, oh, if sales pick up, then those rising boats lift all boats, because it gives that sense of optimism in the world. So you think, so that investors will think, oh, everything's becoming successful, so we'll have a shot too. But if nothing's selling, like not this year's, but last year's Sundance, when maybe 2 or 3 films sold, investors are going, nothing's selling, so I'm never going to make my money back. And that hurts investment. So I think there's, just to shorten that, I think there's a motive within the industry to have this Pollyanna attitude. And then thirdly, I think the problem is with, and this is what my next newsletter hopefully is going to be about, and if it's not the next one, it will be coming up, is about film education. And that's not just, I think finally the organizations within film, and I would say even the organizations within film, have been doing a decent job of educating filmmakers about how they need to take responsibility. And that, because I've spoken a lot at a lot of these, I've spoken at IDA and Find, and I helped create the current incarnation, or the last incarnation, of the IFP Filmmaker Lab, and I helped run it for 10 years. And we would talk, so there is some education within that, but when you look at, like, film schools generally don't teach this. And my feeling about that is that film schools don't have a motivation to teach this, because most film schools, if you're going to get a degree in film, if you're going to get a MFA in film, these days costs maybe $150,000 to $300,000. And is there a motivation for a school that's going to charge $150,000 to $300,000 to a student, or that person's going to go into debt, to tell them that there aren't jobs, or independent films aren't getting financed anymore, or that you're going to make a film and then you're going to have to also raise money to distribute and market it yourself? That's not a good marketing strategy for those programs. And I think the students are also somewhat equally responsible, in that they don't want to hear that either. Some do, but in my experience teaching at CalArts, when I taught a class called Real World Survival Skills, and we covered pitching and deal making, and it's basically everything I wish I had been taught in film school was the subtitle of the class. But half of the class was on distribution and marketing. And when the class was required, I had a full class. When the class was not required, I didn't get any film students. I got experimental animation students, because they knew they had to be entrepreneurial. So nearly, I would say 80% of my class was experimental animators, who are a lovely bunch of people, I have to say, and are super talented. And they're the ones who took the class because they knew they had to be entrepreneurial. But the film students, and this is my only anecdotal evidence, and there's been I haven't done a study, but I could tell that they weren't interested because they all think they're going to make it. They're going to go make a film and it's going to be sold, and they're going to have a fabulous career in Hollywood. And so, which is, you kind of have to have that attitude again to make it through film school. You have to have that positive attitude to, even if you're not in film school, to be in any kind of creative field and to be in film, because it is kind of difficult.
And had this been a class full of, let's say, hopeful entrepreneurs in terms of, like, say, the next startup, the next app, whatever, do you think it would have been the same mindset, or possibly somewhat different, that the film industry, that there's a different connotation to making a movie?
Well, there isn't that notion of being an entrepreneur, an artist entrepreneur, still hasn't seeped through culture, I don't think. I think musicians get it now, like they know. I think in the art world, a little bit. But in film, there's some better awareness now than there was 15 years ago. There's less resistance in the filmmakers that I talk to, and knowing that they need to be aware of this. And more filmmakers are aware of this now than they were 15 years ago. But I think those are the ones that have this awareness tend to be the more seasoned filmmakers, at least the ones that I encounter. And there's still younger filmmakers that, I was just talking to someone about filmmakers who are at Tribeca, this year's Tribeca, and every filmmaker they talk to, they're going to make a sale. Every film, they're making a sale. And it's like, well, I hope you have a plan B as well, and that's come up in our discussions, and that's actually, I've never done this before, where I've done kind of like what's called outbound marketing, where I email people at festivals to say, hey, this is who I am, this is what I do you need some assistance creating a plan? Because I usually feel that it takes a while for filmmakers to kind of get to that point. And I've also never, I'm not really, even though I know about marketing, I never really market myself much. Well, that's not completely true. Here, I'm marketing myself right now. But I've never done that before for some reason. And now in retrospect, I talked to a friend of mine who does similar work. And I said, I'm thinking of starting to do this. And he said, I thought you always did that. And but I'm going to do it now because it's just come up like that every film going into a festival now, into their premiere festival, should know that they need a plan for their film. And they should, and I've been saying this for a long time, but it feels like it needs to be said that much more now, that maybe you'll sell your film if that's what you want to do, and maybe that's going to meet your goals. Maybe, probably not, but you should at least be prepared with an alternate plan and know that there's a plan, so you have something to weigh that sales option against. And because I think a lot of filmmakers still, and I know this from talking to them, haven't really still thought about what their goals are with distribution, and understand that the producer might have one goal, the EP might have another goal, the director might have another goal, and that they have to come together to unify, they have to come together to determine what that one goal is. And they have to weigh what their options are against how do they achieve that goal. And to me, that's the fundamental, if there's one fundamental, besides the fundamental notion of every film is different and every film needs its own distribution plan, the other fundamental idea is that, you should weigh all of your distribution and marketing decisions against what that one primary goal that you have for your film's release.
You've said that for many independent filmmakers, their plan B actually ends up becoming their plan A. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think many filmmakers would be better off with their plan B being their plan A, to be honest. And so plan A is what, for what people have talked about a plan A for the last 15 years, is that unicorn. Like you go to Sundance and you sell your film for $17 million to Netflix, assuming money was your goal, and then you've achieved your goal and you move on to your next film. That's plan A for most filmmakers. Now, we'll get into goals in a second, but I guess we might as well get into, no. So the plan B would be, okay, if you don't make that sale, which I don't feel is a valid plan A for most people. I think most people should look at their film and see what they want and what's the possibilities and then come out with what the best plan A is. But traditionally what's thought of as a plan B is what happens if you don't make a sale? How do you achieve your goal with what you have available? And to me, the steps are looking at who your audience is, looking at, and I've said this earlier already, looking at who's your audience, how do you connect with that audience, what value do you provide to that audience, what are the ways that you connect with that audience, or how does that audience consume media, and you create the paths for your film through distribution to match your audience's consumption of media, and you do that all within what resources you have, and that's the plan B. And to me, the reason why plan B is better than plan A is because the fundamental aspect of plan B is your goal. Plan A assumes everyone's goal is money, in a sense, because that's what plan A is, the sale. Now, people might be sophisticated with plan A and they might say, well, my goal is this, 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 and if I get the this, 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 but that's frankly what most people would say is a plan B. Anytime you become more sophisticated outside of making a sale for your film, I think you're in the land of plan B. So what plan B does is, okay, here's your goal, and I'll just get into that now. For me, goals are one of four things. So it's money, career, change the world, or audience, just getting your film seen. And some people don't view that as a goal, but there's so many filmmakers that I talk to, and that's they made a film to be seen by an audience, and that's what they want, is they want their film seen by an audience. They don't, they understand that money's tough. Many people will just come out and say, I didn't make this for money. A lot of films are supported by grants, etc. So picking one of those four goals is, to me, essential. And then creating a path. So plan A essentially satisfies one of those, which is money, because it's hard. You're not necessarily guaranteed any of the other three if you go with a sale that is dominated by money, or a plan that's dominated by money. And it's pretty classic now that people understand that you sell your film to Netflix for a lot of money. Doesn't mean that they're going to promote it at all, they're going to market it at all, that many people are going to see it, that the algorithm will direct people to see it. It also, you can sometimes negotiate with a streamer to have an impact plan, but that doesn't always happen, and you have to make that choice if your goal is impact. And it can help your career or it cannot help your career. And, these days, you sell a film to Netflix, probably will help your career. But I would say that if your goal, and I think filmmakers are wise to this now, that if they understand that these sales to streaming platforms don't satisfy all goals, and that they have to understand what they're doing when that happens.
Yeah, I think you've said previously that Netflix is a tactic, not an actual goal.
Yes. So yes, any theatrical release is a tactic. Any distribution, any any one thing that you break out from all the different taxes that I've already spoken about, like educational distribution, not a goal, it's a tactic. Theatrical, community screenings, even partnerships with organizations. None of those are goals. Those are all tactics. And that's the first thing. Like usually filmmakers come to me, and when I ask what their goals are, 50% of the time now, it used to be 100% of the time, but 50% of the time now, filmmakers will say theatrical release or Netflix or something like that. But so, even though I'm slagged on filmmaker education, it still is better than it was 15 years ago. There is a level of understanding and knowledge about how to engage with the distribution and marketing system and what's involved in with that than there was 15 years ago. It has seeped through better, but there's still a long way to go, I'd say.
What do filmmakers need to know about theatrical distribution?
That it's not for everyone, but it is for some it makes sense for some films, and that it is, and it has to align with your goals, essentially. And so the last release we did for a film called My Love Affair with Marriage, their goal was audience, and specifically their goal was audience in theaters. And it was like a sub goal, like a more specialized audience goal. And that made sense, There were other things that the release accomplished, but the way we released the film, we told them initially, because it's a kind of challenging, it's a feminist animated film. It's not something that, adult animation generally doesn't do well. Feminist animation, who knows? It also dealt with a woman coming to age in the old Soviet Union. So it's like a lot of things, it had a lot of challenges. And so we said, well, we think we can do 5 to 10 cities. We ended up doing, I think we're up to 36 now, because it's still playing. And because of the way that we release films, a lot of those screenings were sold out, or half packed or 2/3 packed. So they were able to, and they traveled to nearly every screening. And they really want to engage with their audience, and they do it in a really wonderful way. So that's a reason to do theatrical. And the other reason to do theatrical is if you feel your film is for career, and the career component is press. And if your film can garner, even though press gets tougher and tougher and tougher every almost month as journalists get fired from publications, and so that makes it, the LA Times just fired a slew of entertainment journalists. And even before that, it was very difficult to get a review in the LA Times. And now it's going to be nearly, maybe not impossible, but that much more difficult. But we've been very lucky on the releases that we've done. We've gotten tons of press. And that then can have ramifications for the film and for the life of the film. One of the things that a theatrical can do with that press not only helps the career of the filmmaker, but it also helps the career of the film. So for instance, My Love Affair with Marriage, they had made sales overseas. They had been in, I think, like 100 film festivals, some in the United States, but mostly overseas. And they were screening theatrically in France and a lot of broadcast sales, but nothing in the United States. And I came on board. I don't do a lot of work as a sales agent, but I occasionally do, especially if I'm involved in a project on a long-term basis. And to be honest, when I started going out to companies to try to sell the film in the United States, before the theatrical release, I got a couple quick kind of like, we don't know what to do with this film. And so I just shut it down. I said, let's see what the press is like and see if that helps. And it got a New York Times critics pick, and then it got a bunch of other press. And then after that, plus a 30-city theatrical release, then distributors and in this case, digital distributors. There were several good ones, and there aren't that many good ones left, unfortunately, and that's part of what makes distribution also difficult, but there still are enough to survive. And not to saying that you always, and the other thing is you don't always have to go through a digital distributor. You can do distribution in another way outside of traditional digital distribution. And then not only were there distributors interested, but also a small advance as well. So, so that was, those are the things that you can garner from a theatrical release. And I think all of the theatrical releases we've done, I would say that they do elevate the film and affect the life cycle of the film, and I would say also the careers of the filmmakers. But they cost some money. It's not cheap to do a theatrical release.
Well, that was my next question, in that you have talked filmmakers out or advised them against doing theatrical, and what would be the situation for that?
Is if the film, there are a number of films that are really good films, but are not films that I think critics are going to respond to. We actually even did a theatrical release with one of those films and actually did quite well with the theatrical, but there was no press, like literally no press. But it did elevate the film, and it was more of an impact campaign, and it allowed the organizations to elevate what they were doing in their communities, because the film was at a theater, like it felt more than being at a local library or a community center, etc. So, but in general, and then what I mostly talk people out of is I think what you more mean, because I don't, there will be some films that I talk out of theatrical releases, but I'll talk more films out of Oscar qualifying, or needing that they have to rush to Oscar qualify for this year versus next year. And there's one filmmaker who we've become good friends, and he still says that the reason he hired me to do their release was because I talked him out of Oscar qualifying. And because unless you have the resources, unless you have at least 100, I don't know, say 60 at the low end to $150,000, doesn't really make sense to qualify for the Oscars, because you're not going to be able to promote it to the Academy to make a difference. And that's you have Netflix and Amazon and HBO or Max paying millions of dollars on their Oscar campaigns. And so if you're not prepared to have some resources, now that's not saying that there aren't reasons to qualify and have a small budget. There are tactical things that make sense, but you just have to understand why you're doing that, and understand and have really managed expectations as far as what's possible with the resources that you have. So like the Sam Now crew, they did an Oscar campaign, even though they were a long shot. But what it allowed them to do, and they weren't nearly certainly not in the streamer budgets. They had a modest budget to do a campaign. But what it did is it introduced them to a lot of people in the Academy. So it actually raised their profile within the Academy. And they actually just got nominated for a Peabody Award. So maybe they would have gotten nominated without their campaign. But I have a feeling their campaign contributed to their nomination for the Peabody Award. So anyway, I think, again, like everything, it's a case-by-case basis. Like every film, I'll just say it again, every film is different and should be treated differently. And because there is this year especially, there were a number of kind of fun DIY Oscar qualifying campaigns by a number of films. And I think that's I'm going to start doing some case studies similar to this with filmmakers, and that'd actually be, there's already been a little bit done about that, but there are a number of films that kind of joined together and did these DIY Oscar campaigns with each other, and it'd be interesting to talk to them and see what they felt they got out of that, in a sense, and that also became their theatrical release as well. So.
How does a filmmaker figure out who their audience is?
I think there are certain tried and true ways, which is a lot of times filmmakers find out at film festivals. And you might think, oh, you should at least have a sense of who your audience is. You know, I actually think you should have a sense of who your audience is when you're making the film, or even before you're making the film. Not to say that you shouldn't, that should necessarily affect your creativity, but you know, if you're making a film and you're specifically wanting people to see it, you should have a sense of who your audience is when you're making the film, and you should think about ways to make the film that will enhance that audience engagement, or maybe have that audience want to connect and watch the film. So that's one thing. Part of it is just having I would say probably brainstorming it within your team. And then the easiest thing is to say, talk to someone like me. If you're I would even say that brainstorming it within your team, and then consulting someone who has some experience with this, like me, is probably a good idea. You can also and then before festivals, because I'm a big proponent of not having festivals be the first time your film is screened in front of an audience. Like, anyone who does that to me I think it's crazy. Because if you're making your film for an audience, why wouldn't you see how an audience reacts to it before you distribute it? And to me, festivals are distribution. So, and from those audience screenings that you're doing, you can also get a sense of who your audience is, and you can even poll people in your audience. And when I recommend filmmakers do audience screenings, it's not only to see how the film is working, but half of the questions are marketing questions, and getting a sense of how that person liked the film, and then asking them questions about what kind of person they are, and even asking them in the questionnaire, who do you feel is the audience for this film? Because that's just expanding your brain trust to a wider net of people, and they might come up with ideas that you hadn't thought of. So those would be, I guess, that's a long answer to a very short question, but sorry to make you listen to that as I think through that, but yeah.
Well, just as a follow-up, would you recommend someone actually attempt to rent a theater to do this, or just do family and friends and watch it on a TV?
So I suggest a graduated strategy of that. So I think you can start off with a few people first at a TV. I usually advise excluding family and friends because they're just going to say nice things to you. So you want people whose opinions you trust to give you feedback. So I recommend early screenings being just with a few people, and those can be, but you should build towards doing at least one screening in a theater that maybe you rent, or there's a university nearby that you can use, there's someone that you know, and even if you rent the theater, hopefully you rented it in off hours so it can be less expensive, but having at least one screening in a bigger room with hopefully 25 to 50 people, but at least 25 people, I would say. And and then when you're doing small groups, you don't need a questionnaire, but as you get into bigger groups, that's when a questionnaire is helpful. And then I also recommend that you, if you have, say, 25 people, that you break them up into focus groups afterwards and separate them, because generally people like to talk in groups of 12, 14 or less. And if there's a group of 25, it's going to be hard to get a dynamic going.
Once a filmmaker figures out who their audience is, how do they connect with them?
Okay, so that's, to me, there's several channels of communication. So there's, and you can look, there's a model out there which is a little disputed in the marketing landscape called the PISO model, which is paid, earned, shared, owned media. And part of the reason that it gets a little flack is because paid is first. And there's many ways to engage with audiences other than paid advertising. And that's usually the method that most filmmakers have the least resources for, and is often, unless you have lots of money for paid advertising, which in most cases for most films is paid social advertising, it's not that effective, I don't feel. And it can be effective with larger budgets, but small budgets, it can be effective, but it can also not be effective depending on what you're trying to advertise. So the earned part is press, but also user reviews, which I'm a big advocate for. And then the shared part are partnerships and social media, because those are shared audiences. You're sharing an audience with another entity, so either a partner organization or a social media platform. Many people think, oh, that, but I think by now 10 years ago, most people thought, oh, I have an audience on social media. I own that audience. You don't own that audience whatsoever. And I think most people understand now you don't own that audience. And you actually have to pay to even connect with, if you have 5,000 followers on Facebook, those 5,000 people are not seeing your posts. Those 5,000 people are only seeing your posts if you pay Facebook for all those people to see those posts. And then owned media is what you control, and what you're able to control is your film, your trailers, other forms of short content, your key art, any graphics or other graphics that you create, as well as your email list and your website. So actually, in essence, I'm actually telling filmmakers the opposite. So it's OSEP, so OSEP, the OSEP, because it's owned is the most important, shared and earned are kind of equally important, and then paid is probably, for most films on a budget, is the least important. If you have a high budget, paid can be, you can do, depending on who your audience is, it can be a little more effective. But there's a few emerging things that I'm excited to try out in the coming campaigns that just have come out, that I'm curious to see how they'll work in terms of the direct media or paid ad landscape.
And you found out through Bomb It that your audience that loved graffiti art was not an audience that wanted to pay for things.
Yes.
And so
that's the how does your audience consume media aspect of it. I mean, some do, but yes, most don't. So you have to figure out, so I had to understand that, and I had to realize that. But then you need to push out from that audience into other audiences. So that maybe the initial audience of, like, the core of people who love graffiti are graffiti writers. So maybe they're not going to pay, and then maybe some initial fan levels outside of that aren't going to pay. But if those people are spreading it out into the wider landscape of people who love street art, etc., those people will potentially start to pay.
Sure, and you said that some of your clips have been screening in museums, so there's the whole art world, which many can pay for things and are very willing to. So.
Yeah.
Why should a filmmaker submit to film festivals?
I think film festivals are great at connecting films to audience. That being said, not every film is a film festival film, and I've actually worked with a number of them, and who get depressed because my film's not in a festival, what's wrong with me, in a sense. And filmmakers need to understand that there's certain kinds of films that film festivals tend to program. There's a variety of different kinds of festivals. So there's sales festivals or A-level sales festivals. Then there's regional festivals, and then there's a slew of niche festivals. Like there's LGBTQA plus festivals. There's Black film festivals, Latino film festivals, Asian American film festivals, there's documentary film festivals, there's all kinds of human rights film festivals. Unfortunately, one of the biggest human rights festivals just shuttered recently. But there's a whole slew of different kinds of film festivals. So part of it is understanding what your film is and what festivals your film might be appropriate for, but and aligning those. But then also some films just aren't festival films. Like, so we worked on a film, we're still working on a film called Keys, Bags, Names, Words, which is a film about Alzheimer's and dementia. And it's a bit of a survey film, so it follows a lot of different characters. And it also deals with an older population, and both of which aren't necessarily always embraced by film festivals. And especially survey documentaries tend to not be films that generally do well at festivals, depending. I mean, Vomit was a survey film, and that did fine. But so they were struggling with film festivals when they came to me, and I said, well, your film doesn't feel like a festival film necessarily. But that doesn't mean that your film's not a great film and that there's not an audience for your film. And we ended up, I think we're up at 170 screenings in over 30 countries now. And because it's a matter of identifying who the audience is, engaging with that audience, and making that connection. And that's why I think that, even films that are struggling on the film festival circuit, there's a path for them.
Yeah, because I've seen older audiences at certain festivals, much older audience. But was this more for like a clinical audience?
No,
Okay.
It's embraced by, and it could be because it was combined that it was also a survey film, and so I mean I don't have the answers of why, and then ultimately it did. I think it ended up getting into 3 festivals, because I think also it got into some social justice festivals and some healthcare festivals, which they had not been previously applying to. So I think that was also part of it. But it's just, for whatever it is, for whatever reason, it, didn't take. And it could be, I lay out a couple things in terms of survey and, older audience, and yes, a lot of festivals do have older audiences and will play films for an older audience. But so that, what I just said people could say the opposite. There could be comments, what are you talking about? Blah, blah, blah. We're at this festival here and we play films for all age groups. So nothing I'm saying is, well, there are a few things I'm saying that are absolutes, but a lot of things I'm saying are not absolutes, and they're just like on a spectrum. And ultimately, the absolute in this case is that there are films that are quite good that just aren't suited that festivals just aren't taking that year. It could be. Maybe in 3 years, festivals would have run to that film, but there's something about a certain zeitgeist that happens that just, for some films, there's a disconnect.
And just to reiterate, you've said that when your film is at a festival, you are in distribution.
Yes, definitely.
But it's sort of a self-distribution in a sense, because you've paid to be at the festival.
But I don't make distinctions about self or non-self distribution. Like, I feel like that's not a major factor to me. And you might not be. Some films are able to have a festival consultant on board who's booking, or a festival booker who's booking their films. There aren't that many of them, and they do sometimes cost money, and not that many films have that attribute. But that's a case of films that are not self-engaging in festivals in a self manner. But just like any aspect of distribution, yes, you could have a booker do something or a distributor handle something. Like foreign sales agents will tend to handle festivals for films, and it's a revenue stream. And so that's clearly an example of how festivals are, if you're in festivals, you're in distribution. But even on the, as you say, the self side, I'm just saying this because most filmmakers, when they're in festivals, I say maybe many or most filmmakers don't realize they're in distribution. And I still have filmmakers who write to me and say, well, I'm in festivals, or I'm nearing the end of my festival run, and now I want to engage distribution. And it's like, dude, you've been in distribution. And the reason I say that is because there's things that you should be doing during that process that will aid the rest of the distribution for your film.
And that was my next follow-up, is that so many films get a great exposure at a festival and then they just disappear. How do we prevent this from happening?
Well, it's so funny because there's a thing that just came out called the Popcorn List, which was an initiative by a couple of very wonderful people who run the Art House Convergence and the Film Festival Alliance, which polled festivals from around, I think mostly only the United States, like what films did you love last year that don't have distribution? And it's a pretty long list. And you prevent that by having the filmmakers understand the distribution and marketing process, going in with a plan, understanding that festivals are part of the distribution, and they have to plan out the rest of their release that incorporates the festivals, that they have to understand that festivals are only one part of it, and it's not, they have to be in there for the long game and not just think that festivals are it. Some filmmakers might be fine. Look, we played in 10 festivals, we're done, like we're happy, but I doubt there's that many of those festivals. I doubt that there's that many of those filmmakers out there.
Is the festival acquisition model still relevant?
I think for a little bit. That's what's mostly broken. When people talk about the broken landscape, that's kind of what they're talking about. And so sales did pick up at Sundance this year. There were some sales, but you have to understand that Sundance gets 4,000 feature submissions, of which 80 get in. I think the time I ran the numbers, I think it's 1%. It's like you have a better chance of getting into Harvard, if that's any kind of metric, than your film getting into Sundance. And that's only of films that's submitted. There's probably 30,000 other films floating around trying to do something with their film every year, maybe 50,000. There's been different statistics over the years. And so, if you have anywhere from 20 to 50,000 films not getting into sales film festivals, that to me has indicated for the last 15 years, the sales acquisition model has been broken. And so even on a year, if say every film at Sundance sold, it's still broken, because it's still broken for 90% of films or 95% of films. But there's that, going back to, there's that illusion that it's not broken, that there's a functional ecosystem for all films, which goes back to what I was saying before, that people viewed the system as broken now as a new thing, and it's not a new thing. It's been broken for most films for at least 15 years. And the good news about this happening now and being a bigger crisis is that more people in more positions to do something about it are doing something about it. So that's good. Here we are on AI. Okay, so AI, here's the thing. I've written a little bit about this. I am a Luddite, a proud Luddite, I would say, but Luddites were not against technology. Luddites were against how technology and how corporate power was using technology to demean labor. And so it's being, and I don't want to drag into the Luddite thing too much, but it's having a recognition as a laborer and how technology interacts with you, in a sense, or how you interact with technology. So I'm all for technological advances. You have a DSLR there. We're recording this video podcast here, which is going to be on a platform which educates people, which didn't exist, 15, 20 years ago. And YouTube has educated many people about many different kinds of things, not just YouTube, but many. There's all these wonders of technology. Clearly technology has not only democratized film production, but also film distribution and marketing. That's a given. And AI is an extension of that. My issue with AI is, and what I see a lot of filmmakers embracing AI because, filmmaking is expensive, there's less money, we need to be sustainable, so we have to use these new technologies to help us in our quest to make films for a better price and hopefully make money from it, or be sustainable or achieve our goals or whatever it may be. And I get that, but there's two main things that I'm concerned about AI. With the overarching concern of AI is the overarching concern that I have about most modern tech is that it's extractive. And you could say that all technology is extractive, but current internet, phone, the current tech, as it were, is highly extractive. And even though it provides certain benefits to society and creatives, whether those benefits outweigh the extent of the extraction, I would say is questionable. And you see it in how big tech has kind of taken over the entire entertainment industry and kind of, in a sense, destroyed an ecosystem while broken was still functioning and is now, in a sense, you could say not just broken, but crippled because they have different motivations. And their motivations are not to support creativity. Not that the film industry was always supporting creativity, but if you look at the history of film, there have been people involved in funding and studios, and there are certain periods of time more successful than others where there was a celebration of creativity in the film world. That be it as may, I'm actually sidetracked from my 2 points. So the 2 points are, one, my issue with AI is that it's not just a tool for human creators, but the AI is going to become, and is, I believe, already becoming creators unto themselves. So, and I'm a humanist in a sense, and I'm pro-human more than pro-machine in a sense. But it's not so much human versus machine, it's AI isn't just some independent entity out there that is equivalent, that you could say, and there's going to be people who are going to argue with me on this, that, well, what's wrong with machine intelligence? And shouldn't we celebrate it? Eventually, that machine intelligence will need rights just like human rights. And you see this in sci-fi movies. And that's one thing. Yes, okay, I understand that. But AI is controlled by extractive companies. And those extractive companies, I don't see them giving back anything to the world that they're extracting from. And that's probably my biggest issue. And so you will have AI creating content. We're already in a world where there's so much content that exists and so much content that's created by humans. And if you start flooding the market for extractive purposes with content not created by humans, not only is it going to reduce the value of all content, which is already reduced to some extent, but you have to start looking at the question, what is actually created? And there's issues of bias, which are huge within AI, and there's issues of truth within AI. Not that there are some issues with truth with human-created product as well, but I think that the issues are greater. Okay, so that's one aspect, is this creation by non-humans, and I tend to favor creation. What's going to happen with the creation of humans? And what I feel we're already, sustainability within the creative class is already difficult. If you have so much content created by machines, that's going to make it, I feel, more difficult. It's already happening on Spotify, where you have bots creating certain, I think it's humans controlling bots, but that there's articles, I think it was in when I think I listed in one of my newsletters, where Spotify actually favors the music created by bots because there's, I believe, a less of royalty being paid. So you find that certain bot created music is actually getting a larger share, relative share, that human creators are not getting. Anyway, that's one aspect of it. The bigger aspect to me is that, and this is, how can we all get along with AI in a sense, is that there needs to be a governmental regulatory, and I'd say global governmental regulatory understanding that AI exists because of the culture that humans have created for thousands of years. And this is the true aspect of the extraction that AI does, is that it's trained on human creativity. And it functions the way, and as good as it functions as good as it does because of the training that has been done on human created content, whether that be music, films, the written word, history, all aspects of culture is what AI is trained on. And I feel that, okay, well, if AI is a tool and it's frankly already here, then to compensate for all that training on, and the AI companies would say, well, that's public domain, but that's public domain for humans to use. No one said that it's public domain for you extractive industries to use for free to extract profit from humanity. So I think to compensate for that, the AI companies who are going to be making, I would say, billions into trillions of dollars in the coming years need to pay a tax or some sort of fee that goes into a fund that funds creative endeavors, not only original creative work, but also funds an ecosystem of creating that creative work with audiences. So obviously both sides, of course, I'm going to say that. And eventually should create a fund that also creates a minimum basic income to not just probably creators, but also to all humans, because we're already in a situation where AI and AI-enhanced robotics are going to be replacing a lot of people. And I think there's already proof that minimum basic income is a good thing and is helpful to people. And who's going to pay for that? And to me, that's tech companies and AI companies. And AI companies is the new tech. So that's my screed on AI. And I'm saying this, I'm developing a doc series. I'm probably going to be using AI. I already use, I ask Siri to connect me to someone. That's AI. I have in my, I use Google Drive and I write in Google Drive and it corrects that there's some AI in there. I use transcription services. That's AI. I will probably use some AI animation. And I would like to feel better about using AI than I do if there was some funding or some tax or some sort of compensation for how AI has been trained. So that's one. So actually there's a third aspect here, which is that I think AI outside, and then those two aspects I think are my opinion about AI in the creative realm. So, but I think we have to be very cautious about AI in general in how it interacts with us as a society. And as I wrote in my first newsletter about this, even the top AI scientists are saying that, even AI companies are saying, please regulate us. They know that this is dangerous. There's nearly, I would say, well, I think it's probably safe to say, every significant military in the world already has AI. Israel is currently using AI. It's being used in the Ukraine, and that will just accelerate this notion of lethal autonomous weapons that are out of the human loop, as it were. A couple of years ago, it was sci-fi. It's not sci-fi anymore. It's like here. And that's the thing that, as a society, we have to be much more concerned about. There's actually, so I interviewed Stuart Russell, who wrote the textbook, the AI 101 textbook for colleges. It's the primary AI textbook, and I interviewed him for the Mark Pauline project, because Mark Pauline's making a killer robot, basically. And part of the reason is to illustrate what's happening in militaries around the world. And so I interviewed Stuart Russell, and he wrote a book. It's called More Human Than Human, and it's this, basically what I'm saying is that AI's here, but unless we get it under control, we're like basically done as a species. And this is AI scientists saying this. And the concern is, and he and a number of other scientists created this letter around this, and it circulated a year ago. There's 35,000 signatures on it. I don't think anyone gives a... And have I been good on the swearing, by the way?
Oh, you were excellent.
Yeah, I almost broke it, but I caught myself. So he and some other people created a YouTube clip called Slaughterbots. Anyone who thinks AI isn't concerned about AI, you should watch that 7-minute short film, and you might have some other thoughts about AI after watching that film. It covers a lot of ground. Yes, AI is a tool that seems like, and probably can, and many filmmakers are using it to good effect. So yes, it exists as a tool. I will probably be using that. I am already using that tool, and probably will embrace that or use that tool more. And I ultimately want to feel better about using that tool. So number two, one of the concerns about AI is that it's going to create an avalanche of content that we as content creators are already dealing with. And hence, and then because of that, and then number three, because it's using all of human culture, there should be some payback to human culture from that use, so that that extraction doesn't just run rampant and benefit a few people, so that it benefits the many. And even within that funding should also go to counteracting bias and should counteract the other ill effects of AI. That's my AI screed.
How is marketing a movie different from distributing a movie?
So there are two sides of the same coin. So distribution is how an audience engages with a film in terms of watching it either in a community screening, at a festival, online, or even on a DVD, which some people still do. And then marketing is what makes someone want to see the film. Because it doesn't matter if the film is available on multiple platforms. You can put a film up on YouTube and it's available. But if no one is incentivized, or you don't have a way to motivate people to watch that content, it doesn't really matter.
What are some simple and easy ways for a filmmaker to market their movie?
I don't think anything is that simple or easy, but the path to simpler, easy, in a sense, is understanding what your goals are, so that everything is directed towards achieving those goals. Because if you don't do that, you're headed to a path of hardship, because you'll be trying a lot of different things, and some of them might work and some of them might not achieve your goal. You're already going to be, even understanding your goal, you're going to be in a situation where some things work and some things don't work. But if you're trying 5 times more because you have no direction, then that's a problem. So I just don't think I think the best answer to this question is, this is why I came up with the concept of the new 50-50, is that distributing and marketing your film is as much energy, time, and money as creating your film. And while that's not a hard and fast rule, so maybe it's going to be 30-70 or 60-40 or 80-20, you have to understand that connecting a film to an audience is going to take some resources, time, money, whatever resources. And the flip side of your question is, what are there simple and easy ways to make a film? And I would say generally not a good one. And while there are certain new tactics and tactics that are, more tried and true, and some of them are easier than others, I would be probably remiss to say or identify anything that's simple. And as you can see, as I parse this all out, the reason I parse these things out and I talk in this very specific language is because it does take a lot of thought and planning to do it correctly. And I don't want to say that there's any kind of easy solution. That's not to say that there aren't solutions, and that's going back to what we spoke about at the very beginning. I do feel there's a path for every film, and I'm optimistic about that. But the fact that I created a 6-month distribution intensive, and that it's 6 months, indicates that it's not that easy and simple, and that there's a lot to understand about the world of distribution and marketing in order to make it successful for yourself. And I've thought about it, because it's 6 months is a long time to be in a workshop with other people and me doing presentations or bringing experts in. But every time I try to think about cutting it back to 4 months, it's well, then we're not going to cover this, and we're not going to cover this, and we're not going to cover this, and we're not going to cover this, which to me are all essential aspects of creating a distribution and marketing path for your film.
So the notion of the PMD back in 2010, when Think Outside the Box Office was released, I believe.
Yeah.
Is it still relevant, or actually more relevant now than ever before?
I think it's still and more. I think it's the same. I've actually started calling when I'm running an entire campaign, I actually ask for that credit now, because that's what I'm doing. And because you might say that it's more relevant now because the landscape is a bit more broken than it used to be. But again, and maybe I'm a broken record, for most films, the landscape has been broken for 15 years and have needed someone like that on your team to shepherd the distribution and marketing for this past 15 years. And whether you bring on someone outside like me or someone else, or whether you're doing it internally within your own team, someone has to be responsible for that process.
What are some mistakes you see filmmakers make regarding marketing their films?
Well, I think the biggest mistake would be not having a plan, not understanding what your goal is, not knowing who your audience is, not having a plan, not understanding that when you're in festivals, you're in distribution, and not preparing and understanding. Probably the biggest mistake is not understanding that most likely you're going to be, or you or your film team is going to be responsible for distribution and marketing. That there is no, there are a few golden rings out there. There are a few white knights, whatever metaphor. Seem like they all come from Western fairy tales. Unfortunately, I'm realizing, oh my God, all these metaphors I'm using are from, the Western canon. So my apologies for that. But there are a few of those But when you look at 50,000 films made a year, and there's a few of those, you're looking at 49,990 needing to do something else, so.
What's the time frame for how long you should market a film?
I think you should plan on a year. And although I talk to Ted Hope about these things a lot, and he's now thinking or saying a year for festivals, and then to develop your audience through the festival circuit, and then another year for release to continue engaging audiences and to extend or bring that release beyond the festivals. But that's for a very specific festival-oriented film. Not all films, as we talked about earlier, are festival films. But what his point is, and I would agree, is that audience development takes some time. And so you can shorten that by starting your audience development before you finish your film, and which I do advocate for. And so I would say somewhere, let's to make it easy, and so that I don't parse this out too much and extend this interview too long, somewhere between a year and 2 years, generally. It's rare that it's less than that.
Okay, so if you've been accepted into a festival and you will play on July 1st, when are you starting your marketing?
So you're playing on, well, I think you should be starting your marketing in post-production, to be honest, that you should be outreaching. So say if you're a documentary or you have a fiction film that has certain identifiable audiences that there are organizations organized around, you should be doing that no later than post, connecting with those audiences. And some films start in pre-production, connecting with those audiences. And there's a case study that's on my newsletter page of my website about a film called No Small Matter. And it's a 2-part newsletter blog. And it talks about their process of how they engaged with their audience from a very early stage. So what was your question again?
Well, so then I think you answered it then. So then forget about the festival dates. Before you even submit to festivals, you should already be marketing. That answered it.
Yes, I would say so. But you can start at the festival or in advance of festivals. I mean, if you haven't done it then you're like working in a hurry. And then you can do a certain amount before the festival and then plan that you're going to do more after the festival. I mean, it's not like what I'm saying, even though I advise filmmakers to start earlier, if you haven't, you can still do things. It's not that you will have to adjust and your life cycle is probably going to be longer than that. So, and then, it's the good, fast, cheap. You get 2. So if you want something good and fast, you're going to pay for it. So you can shorten that time period by throwing money at certain things. But we're talking to mostly independent filmmakers who don't have those huge resources. And so that's why time is on your side.
How do you work with filmmakers?
So I work with filmmakers in a couple of ways. So I either start off with a consultation, and that can sometimes lead to running an entire campaign for a film, which now over the last year and a half has included theatrical releases. And then the other way I work with filmmakers is through the 6-month distribution intensive, which I just mentioned. And either way, you can come to my website and either just email me at john@8above.com, or it's on my website. You can either just fill out the contact form, or there are forms for the intensive and also for consulting. And for the intensive, I hold these webinars to explain what the intensive is and see if it's the right fit for you. If it's for consulting, I'll do an initial call, like half-hour call, and see whether we're a good fit. And then the other way you can connect with me is through my newsletter, which by the time this airs might be a Substack, but you can sign up for the newsletter on my website, which is 8above.com. And actually, when you sign up for my newsletter, you get a free copy of the book, on PDF, and then you also now get both Vomit and Vomit 2, the links to those. So
Wow.
that's your reward. And one of the things I'm trying to figure out with Substack is that I know with Substack you can give rewards or gifts when people subscribe, but I actually want people to, or pay for the subscription, but I want to give people, and I just have to figure out if Substack allows this, and I haven't looked into it enough yet, is I want to give people something for just subscribing. So, because I'm a big believer in what is called gated content, which is basically where you give things to your audience in exchange for an email address or signing up for a newsletter. So.
Right, you had talked about previously that you should have a clipboard at a festival, and I think someone had said, or you could do a QR code, and you corrected them on that because you said a lot of people, there could be a disconnect or they could freak out.
No, I don't know if they freak out. It's just what we found anecdotally is that people don't sign up with QR codes, but people sign up with a clipboard. And it's that, I think it's that disconnect of technology, like it's old tech, like paper and pen, like that disconnects people from thinking, oh, if I sign up, using my phone, what's gonna happen? And so, yeah, that's why I'm a big advocate of clipboard still for email addresses.
The Luddite factor.
It's not completely, yes, I guess you could say but it's like, it's a Luddite factor, but it's actually just something that proves that works, as well, so.